So, good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending our latest Simon Talk. We are joined this morning by Koen Hermans, who's Assistant Professor of Social Policy and Social Work. And we're going to talk today about measuring homelessness and what the Belgian experience can tell us. I think forgive me, but I don't think it's an understatement to say that Koen is one of the leading academics and practitioners of measuring homelessness across Europe. But the work that he's done, particularly in Belgium, is really insightful and has been a huge boon to anyone who's interested in this. Ourselves in the Simon community, as people will know, have been looking at measuring homelessness and looking at things like hidden homelessness, not with a view to creating what's the biggest number and just how gargantuan is the issue, but rather to better understand it and how we can target our policies and target our housing provision to ensure that we can actually address homelessness and prevent the very visible forms of homelessness that we see in people ending up in shelters and on the street. So I'm going to hand over shortly now to Koen, but just to say for people attending, if you are on social media, if you can use the hashtag Simon Talks, and then we can kind of amplify your experiences of today. And also, Koen is going to speak for around 40 minutes. There's a huge amount in his presentation that he has to talk about because the work is, as I said, covers the whole of Belgium. So there's a lot of detail. And so if questions occur to you, there's a chat box and a Q&A box. If you want to pop your question in there as it occurs, and it's okay to ask 2 or 3 questions, and I'll curate and ask those questions of Koen towards the end. But we're going to let Koen kind of complete his presentation, and then we'll do the Q&A at the end. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Koen now with our thanks for his appearance here today, particularly as he's taken the time out of his annual leave, which is much appreciated.
Thank you very much for your introduction, Wayne. Good morning, everyone. My name is Koen Hermans, and I will, like Wayne already introduced me, I will tell a story about what we have done on homelessness counts in Belgium. Let's see. Okay, normally you can see my screen now. Started with executing or implementing homelessness counts at the local level in Belgium in 2020. I will say something about the method that we have developed, but I'll also say something about the results and why it's also important to have not only national statistics on homelessness, as is the case in many countries, but it's also important to have local statistics and local indicators. I think what's quite important in homelessness research is that we really try to avoid the pitfall of assumptive research. It's my colleague Nicholas Please of the University of York in the UK who's stating that it's really there's a lot of homelessness research, but that homelessness research is not always good research. That homelessness research is reproducing the stereotypes about homelessness. And he defines assumptive research as research when researchers regard homelessness as a clearly defined and understood social problem. That it is people sleeping rough, while largely male, and whose homelessness is linked to support needs and behavioral factors. Such research adds nothing to the understanding of homelessness because it assumes homelessness is understood, which means that questions about the nature of homelessness do not need to be resolved beyond determining, for example, how many rough sleepers in a particular city are taking heroin. The pitfall of assumptive research, and this is one of the reasons why I think homelessness research is not always good research. We really have to think about what kind of stereotypes are behind our own ideas about homelessness. So, for instance, people living without their own space, without privacy, and without security of tenure in Europe are not considered by homelessness research because homelessness means a predominantly male population sleeping rough or in emergency shelters and nothing else. So this quote by Nicholas is really challenging because it really makes us think a lot about what kind of research that we're doing and how to what kind of That research is also possible on homelessness. This is why we have developed our own method on homelessness counts. So we have developed a point-in-time count, and I will say something about the method shortly. It's about, we need to answer 5 specific questions. So first of all, the methodology, who do we count? We're focusing on ethos line 1 to 6. So we're trying to have all homeless persons involved, not only those sleeping rough or those in shelters. The second question is, when we collect data, who is counting them? We involve a lot of different services. What do we want to know? We don't not only want to know how many persons are homeless, but also their profile characteristics. We make, or more specifically, the services make use of a short questionnaire consisting of 17 questions to get a better view on the homeless population. And also a very important issue is how do we communicate about the results. So we always involve services, local authorities, the press, when we release the results. And we always involve also the local authorities in this process. So like I said, we are not only focusing on people sleeping rough or on people in emergency accommodations, we're making use of ethos flight. So it also means that we are focusing on those who are living in institutions, the institutional leavers, those who have to stay longer than needed due to lack of housing, or those who have to leave the institution, a healthcare institution, a prison, a youth care institution, in the next 30 days. We focus on people living in non-conventional dwellings due to lack of housing, and especially when you're interested in rural homelessness, and it came a little bit as a surprise to us, but this is also quite important a group when you're focusing on homelessness in more rural areas. And then, of course, the specific form of hidden homelessness is meaning or referring to homeless persons living temporarily with family and friends, the so-called sofa surfers or couch sleepers. And specifically for Belgium, we have added this 7th category. Why? Because eviction is quite a big challenge in our country. We have a lot of evictions going on. So we also focus on those at risk for eviction within 30 days. So they have to leave their tenure in 30 days because of the judicial procedure. The landlord has made use of a judicial procedure to evict the person. On that specific day, that point in time, we involve a lot of services, not specifically services involved for or targeted at persons being homeless, but we also involve as much as possible health and other institutions like hospitals, psychiatric institutions, prisons, refugee centers. We involve, of course, low threshold services, but not only those specifically for homeless persons, but also social restaurants, volunteer organizations, and we also involve social housing companies, especially to get a view on those at risk for eviction. We collect 17 variables on these persons. So it's about age, identity, income. You can see it on the slides. Children is a very important issue. Why? Because children are often neglected in homelessness statistics, especially on the national level or at the European level. There is almost no data available on the amount of children that are homeless. We're focusing on the duration. We also have some questions that are a little bit less of quality on the perceived causes of their homeless situation. And we also ask whether they are assisted by social services. How do we do it? The services make use of a questionnaire on a specific day. So in Belgium, it's in the end of October, in the last week of October, they fill in questionnaires. All these services fill in questionnaires for all those adults older than 16 years. Can be that the person who is homeless is involved in the data collection, so that the questionnaire is used together with the person. It's also possible that the questionnaire is filled in only by the service. And given the fact that we have a lot of services that are involved, we always have the risk of double counts. So we make use of a client identifier to identify double counting. It's mainly based on the letters of the first name, the second name. So we don't collect the names itself, but we make use of a combination of letters in order to identify double counting. So it's mainly what we call an extended service-based count. We involve a lot of services at the local level on a specific day to collect information on all these different types of homelessness. And like I said, we also involve the services, the local authorities and the press, not only at the very end of the process, but throughout the whole process. And which is quite important for us is that after we have collected the data, we have done the first analysis of the data, we set up focus groups with those services who are involved to understand our data better. So they are always present at the table together with us to interpret the data, what can we learn from it. We always give previews of the results to the local authorities and more specifically to the local politicians, so that in order to prepare them for the results. I call these kind of meetings always therapeutic meetings, because especially in a local, at the local level in more rural areas, they're always thinking that there are not many homeless persons in their municipality, but the results show a different view. So it's really important for them to be involved as soon as possible. And we always have a press conference and we set up a webinar for the services who have been involved when we present the data. It's on a specific, it's in the end of October, but it's actually a process of a whole year. We start somewhere around March. We set up a local steering group in order to identify all the relevant services. We organize in June a kickoff at the local level. We invite all services, local authorities. We invite the mayor to do a short talk. And the idea is to stimulate, or the goal is to stimulate ownership. It's not the researchers that are doing research, it's actually the services themselves together with the local practitioners and the local authorities. In month 7, month 8, it's around September, we set up information sessions for the services. How can they make use of the questionnaire? What is the meaning of the different questions? And then just 2 weeks before the counting day, the preparation is starting, the services are identifying clients. When needed, they prepare a street count. And then in the end of October, the day of the count is taking place. And somewhere around the end of December, the beginning of January, we will organize already the first feedback sessions to the services who are involved. Of course, the results are still a secret. We only communicate at the end of March about the results, but we already give them a preview on the results. And what we've learned until during the last 4 years is that the secret of the research is always respected. So although we present already some preliminary results in the beginning of January, these results are always, they are not released to the press, they are not released to the broader public. And this is also something I'm always stressing. We're building together with all these services and with the local authorities to that specific moment at the end of March. And at that specific moment, we release the results. And I'm always stressing, when someone is leaking the results beforehand, the whole process is destroyed. So we really are working together to that specific moment at the end of March to present the results. Here you see a map of Belgium. We started in 2020 with you can see Limburg and also Gent. The black line in the middle of the country, that's actually our language border. So above the black line, that's the Dutch-speaking part. Under the black line is the French-speaking part of Belgium. As you can see, we started in 2020 with our first local and regional counts, and we are now in the dark green in 2024. So it means that we are now setting up a fifth wave of local counts. You can also see that 3 cities are almost black. It's Gent, it's Leuven, my own city, and it's the Arlon in the south of Belgium. These are black because these are the first 3 cities who have set up the second count. So they have done a count in 2020, and they have re-implemented a count in 2023. So actually, we're now, like I'm saying, we have still some blind spots in our country, but at the same time, we're starting up the process of reproducing the count in order to understand changes and to see is homelessness increasing, is it decreasing, what can we learn from the comparisons between different years. We started in 2020, and our counts were not financed by the national or the regional authorities, but they were financed by a foundation, the King Baudouin Foundation. We always hoped that the national government was interested in what we were doing, but actually that was not the case. They were not waiting. They were not very interested in homelessness statistics. However, since our method was really brought a lot of enthusiasm at the local level, a lot of enthusiasm of the services. In 2023, the Flemish government, so the Dutch-speaking government of the North, started financing our counts, and since this year, 2024, the Walloon government, so that's the government of the French-speaking part of Belgium, also is financing our work. So this is really interesting to see. At the national level, the national government was not interested in this kind of method, but because we changed direction, we started from the local level, developing the methods, introducing the method. In the end, the regional governments are now financing our work, and it also means that we are now responsible for the production of official regional statistics on homelessness in Belgium. I'm not going too much into detail on all the specific local and regional counts and on the results, but throughout all these different local and regional counts, we have learned a lot about homelessness in our own country. And we have a much more what I call sophisticated view on homelessness. First of all, the numbers are much higher as expected. So I was talking about these therapeutic conversations with local and regional politicians. They really have to get a grip on the results. They're quite shocking for them, actually. We also see that if we combine ethos 1, 2, and 3, so those who are sleeping rough, those who are making use of night shelters, and those are in temporary accommodation for the homeless persons, this is only about 25% of the total population. So the classic homelessness statistics only grasp a very small amount of the total population. In every local and regional count that we have done until now, ethos 6, so far service, is the largest category. So the implicit or the by effect, the implicit effect of what we are doing is that there's a growing awareness about the importance of hidden homelessness. And actually, we're only making use of these services who are in contact with those persons. So we can expect that we actually don't have the full view on hidden homelessness. We all know that some of the persons are not in contact with some kind of service. So it's an underestimation, and even then, ethos 6 is the largest category. Homelessness is not only a reality in the largest cities in Belgium, I will come back to that. We also see, I will come back to that, some gender-specific survival strategies. So the living situations of men and women are very different. Given our attention, our focus on children, homelessness or homeless children is a very, very big issue in my own country. It's not that they are sleeping rough, that's not the case. But since you're making use of a more broader conceptualization of homelessness, you also see that homeless children are, for instance, staying temporarily with friends or families. I will come back to that. A very important group, and we were totally not aware of that, is those who need to stay longer than needed in psychiatric institutions. And the institutional leavers, I will give you soon some statistics about that. It's much higher on the agenda now, that specific group. So actually they can leave the institution, their treatment has been finished. However, they don't have a housing, they don't have any housing, so they are staying actually longer in the psychiatric hospital because they don't have housing. We have a more in-depth view on homeless young adults. And what we also see is that persons with migrant background are overrepresented. And we also have data on undocumented migrants. It's a very ethical issue, it's a very sensitive issue, but we don't exclude beforehand undocumented migrants. So we try to collect data also about this group. We are very aware of the sensitive issues, but at the same time, the services are really motivating us to do it. The services are saying we are really in contact with undocumented migrants who are homeless. They're really desperate. It's a really difficult situation. And we really need to show that this group is also present in our country, on our streets, and we need to find solutions for them. And we also have a better view on the target group of Housing First, those with chronic homelessness, those with chronic complex needs. We can identify them and we can make estimates about the amount of Housing First services that we need. So we have a much more sophisticated view on homelessness. We identify subpopulations, we identify the hidden homelessness, and we also raise the issue of homelessness in more rural areas. However, we not only collect data, we also collect stories. After each count, we ask services, practitioners, social workers to describe some of the cases they're working with, some of the persons they're supporting. And these stories really give an additional meaning to the statistics. So for instance, this is one of the case descriptions that we have collected. And this is about a man who had the job, who has been working for more than 20 years. However, he had a very difficult childhood. He had some addiction issues, but he gets a bad accident, he gets a serious injury, and all his life is really collapsing. So a lot of things are happening after that injury. He loses his house, he can't pay his hospital bills anymore, he can't do his job anymore, and in the end he loses his flat and survives on the streets with the rest of his savings. He lives in a garage box. So you can see that the social work has a really good view on this trajectory. And these stories are also very useful for local politicians to tell the story behind the numbers. So there's always a person behind the statistic, and these stories really help to get a grip on the homelessness trajectories. What is now the impact of the counts on the local and the regional level? And like I said in the beginning, we were really hoping for a national count. After 4 years, I'm much more in favor to start at the local level. Why? Because you have a growing awareness and a visibility of homelessness at the local level. Since we are cooperating with local authorities, we are giving them statistics on their local situation. It also means that this social problem of homelessness is discussed at the local level. So the numbers make the problem visible. And also the services are saying to us it's really essential that we have these kind of numbers, because we tell a lot of stories about homelessness in our areas. However, we are not believed by local politicians, by local authorities. And now the numbers are really showing why, are really confirming our stories. The second important effect of our methods is that more and more services are making use of ethos slides. So that more broad conceptualization of homelessness is really now considered as the way to understand homelessness. Not only because of the numbers, but also because of the stories. Because in the stories and the case descriptions, as we call them, you can see the trajectories, and you can see that people are, for instance, are sleeping rough for a very short period of time, but their housing situation remains very insecure. So they are not in the streets anymore, they're not in shelters anymore, or in temporary accommodation, but they are staying temporarily with friends or families there. They have a carriage box, like in the example, stuff like that. So the ethos slide, the typology is much more agreed upon as the way to understand homelessness in Belgium. Since the method is based on the cooperation with services, it also means that you have quite intensive process in which you work with all these services. It also means that there's a lot of networking going on between the services. They get to know each other better. What we learn from the local authorities, for instance, is that they're saying we are in contact, we know all these services, but it's the first time that we have them all together at the same table in order to discuss homelessness. So in the end, it leads to more shared goals, a more shared approach at the local level to homelessness. However, these counts also create expectations. They create expectations. Homeless persons themselves get aware of the method. They get to know the results, and they're saying, okay, but now you know our situation. What are you going to do about it? Also, the services are more pressing, are more raising the issue to the local authorities and to the national authorities. And what we also see is that at the local level, new action plans are developed. Not in all the cities and the regions, and not in all local authorities. We really have to say that it's mixed. It's a mixed image, I think. Most of them are setting up network events. They're setting up cross-organizational meetings, local working groups, a task force. So since that a lot of services are involved during that whole process of a year, afterwards, the local authority can make use of that network in order to bring all these actors together. Some are setting up more emergency housing, some are setting up a night shelter, but we also see new housing first initiatives. Some are developing a more preventive approach to homelessness. So we see a lot of dynamics, however, not in all the cities. And we have to, I have to admit that some of the cities are less enthusiastic about the results, and they don't do much about it. So the counts have a positive effect, but not in all cities and in all local authorities. Since we have we started at the local level at some smaller regions, but now we have set up we have used this local statistics and regional statistics to have an extrapolation, to have an estimate for the whole Flemish region. So this means the whole Dutch-speaking region. And on the left of the table, you see the amount of inhabitants of the different municipalities. So we have very small municipalities in our country. These municipalities have between 0 and 15,000 inhabitants, and then you see the two largest cities of the Dutch-speaking part. It's Gent and it's Antwerp. They have more than 120,000 inhabitants. And at the right of the table, you can see the estimate. We estimate that 13,533 persons are homeless in Flanders, the Dutch-speaking part. But you can also see that the largest group of the homeless population is almost 5,000, 4,936, are those who are temporarily living with friends or families. They live in homeless. And like I said, we didn't expect that, but the institutional leavers, there are 1,774 persons. It's quite a large group. And these are mainly persons who are staying longer than needed in a psychiatric hospital. You can also see that sleeping rough, it's mainly happening at the largest cities. What's also quite surprising, if you look to Ethos 5, this is the non-conventional dwellings, the group, the population we have estimated is 1,561. And it's an important issue also in these smaller municipalities. And what we have discovered is not that they are staying in carriage boxes and stuff like that, but in Flanders, they are mainly staying at campings, at holiday parks. So it's an issue that they're not that expensive. So people are staying in these kind of holiday parks because of the fact that they don't find any other housing in their region. These are the estimates for the adults. We also have estimates for the children. It's about 6,000 children. It's a really, really big group, especially if you compare them with the adults. And I have to stress that these children are living with parents, that they're not alone, of course, but they are staying with one or more parents in that specific ethos category. You can see that most of that sleeping rough of children is a really, really externalized situation. So we only have 17 children sleeping rough, a very, very small amount. But you can see that the largest group of the children are staying in temporary accommodation and long-term shelters, but also, and I already mentioned it, 1,561 71 children are temporarily staying with friends or family together with their father, with their mother. So it really shows that homelessness is not. What I also can say is the last remark, that homeless children are much more present in the local, in the smaller regional areas. You can see that 12% of these homeless children are staying in very small municipalities, and 23% of them are staying in municipalities between 15,000 and 30,000 inhabitants. This is a big difference between adults and children. And children are much more present in these rural areas, or they are staying temporarily with friends or families, or they are together with their parents in a temporary accommodation from the local authorities. But maybe the most important thing that we are showing is that we have 13,000 adults and we have 6,000 children. So 1 out of 3 persons that we have data on are under 18 years. So this is a really shocking number. The data, since that we have very extensive data on profile characteristics, we can also make subgroup analysis. And this is, for instance, analysis we have done on young adults between 18 and 25. And you can see that when those who are between 18 and 25 are even more staying temporarily with friends or family. So for young adults between 18 and 25, almost 50%, 1 out of 2, is staying temporarily with friends. When you compare this with adults older than 26, it's only 31%. You can also see that they are less sleeping rough than adults, and they're also less in night shelters. So night shelters are those shelters in which you can go to at night. You can stay there, you have a bed for 1 night, and in the morning you have to leave. And we know from the stories from the practitioners and from these services that youngsters don't make much use of them, and it's also confirmed by our data. But it's especially if you want to focus on young adults, and we know in our data that 1 out of 4 adults is between 18 and 25, so the group of young adults is an important target group. If you want to reach out to them, you have to find ways to reach out to them when they're in a situation of hidden homelessness, when they are couch surfing. We also see for young adults that there are more women, almost 40% of them are female, for those between 18 and 25. Like I said, much more sofa surfing. And what we also learned, and it was a little bit striking for us, that the main reason they become homeless is because of conflict with the family. And I will come back to that in a minute. And what we also see is that in the population of young adults in our country, persons with an intellectual disability are much also, I'm going to say it differently. So 13% of all young adults have an intellectual disability. This is what the services report to us. Compared to those older than 26, it's only 6%. So there's also a specific subgroup in that young adult population that needs specific support given their disability situation. What we also have done is a more in-depth analysis of these young adults. And like I said, we saw that almost 37% become homeless because of a conflict with the family. And what we have learned on a more in-depth analysis is that young adults are not only care leavers. So there's also that stereotype, that idea that that homelessness of young adults is mainly linked to a history in state care, to a history in child protection. But this is not the case. If we look more into detail in this subgroup, we know that 1 out of 4 of them were in a youth care institution during their youth, between 0 and 18. So it's an important group, 1 out of 4, but it's not the majority. What we learned based on the more in-depth analysis is that 30% of them are newcomers. What are newcomers? These are persons that are not born in Belgium. So they are mainly refugees who come to our country and who end up homeless. And then a third group is what we have called Belgians without a history in care. So this is they have the Belgian nationality. They have not been in an institutional in a residential institution in their youth. And then, like I said, we go back to the services and we say, okay, these are the numbers. Can you explain us who are these Belgians without a history in care? And then, based on the numbers, the stories from the practitioners are popping up. They're saying, but we call them survivors. They had a very difficult situation during their youth. They survived their own parental situation, but they left home when they're 18, 19, or they were a big conflict, and they're actually thrown out of the house by their parents. So it's an important group, and we were not aware of them. And the same applies to the newcomers. And before these numbers, a lot of policy attention went to the care leaver group. All the measures were focused on those who are leaving care. How can we avoid their homeless situation? Now they are setting up new measures, and also the services are thinking, oh, but wait, we also need to have a specific approach to these other groups. We also, with regard to women, we see that 30 to 40% of the total population are female. Women, I was talking about these gender-specific survival strategies. Women are much more in ethos 3 and 6. They are much more accompanied by children. And when we look to the reasons for homelessness, it has to do much more to relationship problems. However, what we also have done is we compared homeless women with children, with homeless women without children. And it was really striking to see that in the women population, we have that subgroup of those two subgroups. When women have their children with them, they are much more staying in ethos 3, so that's that 43%. They are on temporary accommodation, or they are staying temporarily with friends or families. However, when the children are not involved, the survival strategies of these women were much more similar as those of men. So when they are not accompanied by women, by children, they stay more temporarily with friends. We also see that women are much less on the streets and stuff like that. So these kind of data make it possible to have much more detailed and sophisticated analysis. And then the last, oh, I see that there's still some Dutch. This is what I said. We also have repeated for first time the count in Gent, in the city of Gent, city with around 230,000 inhabitants. At the left of the slide, you see in 2020, we counted 1,472 adults and 401 children. And in the light blue, in 2024, in 2023, we counted 1,857 adults and 633 children. And this was really striking also for us. Again, this is a very progressive city. And after the count in 2020, they developed a lot of new measures. There was a lot of policy attention to homelessness. And although they set up a lot more actions after 2020, the results were even higher than in 2020. Of course, we had the COVID crisis, we had the inflation. There are also some good reasons behind these numbers, but it also put a lot of stress on these local politicians. So the first time you can say, okay, these are the results, we were not aware of them, but we will take some action, and we were really motivated to do something about the problem. However, when you repeat the count, and the results are less positive than in the first count, of course, then it becomes much more difficult. And so there was a lot of stress at the local level, at the local authority. How are we going to explain this bad result to the broader public? Why did we choose to do a second count as the first city in Belgium? It is a stupid idea. Now the results are much more negative than in 2020. So for me, it was really interesting to see how these local politicians react after the first round of counts and after the second round of counts. So there's a lot more stress. They're much more nervous about these results, especially when they are more negative. So I'm not going too much into detail, but it's something to take into account. What we're doing now, like I said, we are trying to cover the whole country in Belgium. So we are setting up additional counts, and we are starting up process of replication. So in some of the areas we're replicating the methods, we are doing it for a second time. Since last year, also in the Netherlands, we are working together with a research team in the Netherlands. And this Dutch team makes also use of a methodology. They started with 2 cities in 2023. They have 6 cities and municipalities around the 6th city in 2024. And in 2025, so next year, 20 regions in the Netherlands will make use of the same method. So it's very comparable with what we have done in Belgium. There's a lot of enthusiasm at the local level to make use of this kind of data. And what's even more interesting is to see that the results are very comparable with the Belgian situation. And we're also involved in an EU project in which we try to develop a common methodology for local and regional counts for the whole of Europe. And the cities of Dublin and York and Cork are taking part in that project. So that's a huge project. I'm not going too much into detail about that, but we are not copying the Belgian methodology to the whole of Europe, because we know that this is not how it works, but we try to develop a common methodology in which we involve, in this year, 15 cities in Europe, and next year, probably around 30 cities in Europe, who will cooperate together in this project to develop a common methodology to set up local and regional counts. So this is my story, just in time. I think I have to apologize for the noise. Hopefully it didn't disrupt you too much. And of course, I'm very interested in questions.
That's great. Thanks for that, Koen. I mean, there's an awful lot there that actually overlaps with what we know of the research that's been done here around homelessness, and I think particularly those subgroups of youth homelessness and women's experience of homelessness. The that group that you talked about, that kind of the way we would see them, or sort of identified in Simon services, would be they're the young people that kind of fell through the cracks of the system, or even services in terms of family services, sports services, social services might have been aware of them, but they didn't feel the situation was bad enough to take them out of the family and to take them into care. And therefore they fell through the gap because they don't have that care leaver supports that others might have. So I think there's an awful lot of similarities, and obviously the differences obviously are there as well. We have a couple of questions in, and with apologies to everyone for any part we had in the connection issues there, but hopefully people were able to get most of it, and I think with Koen's permission we'll share the slides as well, if that's with anyone who was here. So we do have a couple of questions. One of them was, do you find local authorities are very proactive in trying to resolve their homelessness issues, and do they have minimum targets to reach? I suppose one of the interesting things, I suppose, the Irish context is homelessness is a very political issue here. It's a national political issue and has been for a number of years now. The drivers of it, because it's well acknowledged, have been the private rental market and the housing crisis we've been experiencing. So I suppose to keep it on topic, and you've talked a little bit about this in your presentation, has the kind of awareness around the numbers and that kind of dissemination of the scale of the homelessness crisis, or of homelessness in Belgium, let's not use the language of crisis, has that had an impact on how local authorities are addressing homelessness? And as much as maybe the second count has created more angst and political disquiet around it, has it increased momentum, or do you feel that it's actually been counterproductive?
I think I need to make a distinction between the local level and the Flemish level. So we have a regional authority we have a regional government for the whole Dutch-speaking part of Belgium, and they're responsible for housing policies. So actually, in our country, housing is a regional competence. We are actually paid now by the regional government to do the counts. However, we're not paid by the Minister of Housing. We are paid by the Minister of Poverty Reduction. And it's really interesting to see, because the Minister of Housing is a right-wing, a nationalist politician. And the Minister of Poverty Reduction is from the Catholic Party, which has a more progressive, a little bit more progressive view on homelessness. So at the Flemish level, the numbers are made use of by a lot of the opposition, by the services, really to have an effect on the Minister of Housing. But until now, it's more counterproductive than productive, I think, on that level, on the Flemish level. Why? Because we have a very long waiting list for social housing. There are almost 250,000 households on this list in the Flemish part. So we also have a huge housing crisis. But the right-wing politician is trying to make the waiting list shorter. So he's adding additional conditions to be on the waiting list. So to be honest, we don't have had a lot of impact on this government until now. When I look to the local level, it's a much more mixed image, I think. First of all, what we see is that a lot of these local authorities, they choose for the old methods or the old solution. So it means more shelters. Okay, we have rough sleepers, we will open up a night shelter, or we will set up more temporary accommodation. And my answer is then always, but this is not a solution for homelessness. They will remain in the statistics. They only switch from one category to the other. So it's not a structural solution. So, but I'm already enthusiastic about the fact that they are really acknowledging the numbers and they're trying to set up solutions. Not the best, but they're setting up solutions. So there's a growing awareness that they need to do something. And then there are some municipalities and some local authorities who are really trying to open up the local social housing stock for homeless persons. And this is really interesting. So in my country or in the Flemish-speaking part, in the end, the local authorities decide who will get a social housing. And in some of the areas, some of the local authorities, they really try to have these homeless persons higher on the list. So that's really interesting. So they're opening up the local social housing market for this group. So it's a very mixed image. Now we had some elections in 2000 and now this year for the Flemish government. And what's really interesting, the negotiations are taking part at this very moment. So there's no information. Sometimes some information is leaked to the press, and the counts are really in the note in the text. So that's really interesting. I don't know what they are going to do with it, but you see that there is some political and some of, especially the Socialist Party, who is now doing the social the negotiations for a new government. They already said to me, we really need those counts to have the issue on the agenda. So if we don't have these counts, it's really difficult for us as a progressive party to make this to get this topic on the political agenda. So it's the opposite, I think, from Ireland.
Okay. Thanks for that. I mean, I do think again there's some crossover there between it's the unwelcomeness perhaps in some quarters of the numbers, but also it does create momentum and sometimes not in the right direction. But I think if it can be harnessed, I think there are cases for and against. The couple of more questions that have come in. There's one with you mentioned the experience of migrants and people seeking asylum. Is that different here? Because I know in some European countries, the migration system and the sort of international protection system are very integrated with the homeless system, and people have access, where in Ireland that's not the case. And I'm just wondering, is that how it is in Belgium, just before, so we don't compare apples and oranges? And how would people who are in the immigration system, would they have access to social housing? I suppose is one of the questions.
Migration is a topic with a lot of dimensions. First of all, night shelters are accessible for migrants, or also for undocumented migrants. Temporary accommodation, they're only accessible when you have a permit to stay in the country. So when your procedure has been done. We have a specific system for asylum seekers. However, this system is not sufficient. So it also means that people are ending up in the streets. But what's even a more difficult issue is that when you are in the refugee system and your procedure has ended and you can stay in the country, and so you have, how do we say it, you have protection, then you need to leave the refugee system in 2 months. However, we have a housing crisis, so they don't find any housing solution. So there's a lot of pressure on them to leave the refugee system, and they're ending up in very bad quality housing. because they don't have access to the social housing. So what has changed during the last, I was talking about the right-wing nationalist housing minister, what he has decided is that you need to be longer than 5 years in the municipality in order to get access to the social housing. So that's impossible. So it's a way to get refugees out of the social housing.
Okay.
A very last element, I think what's really interesting is that in Ghent, they have a very interesting experiment in which they have a long-term shelter for undocumented migrants. So this is really something new. And the idea behind this is, so it's really difficult to work with undocumented migrants when they are on the streets. However, and so they have set up a specific shelter. And what they have learned based on their experience from the last 2 years is that almost around 40% of them actually do have access to the system. Actually do have, when you're really diving into their procedure, they have a permit to stay. So it's a really challenging approach. They're saying working on their permit to stay, on the judicial situation, is key, but it's impossible to work on that when they're on the streets. You lose them. When they are in this kind of temporary shelter, it gives them rest, and it gives them also time to think about, what am I going to do with my life? So it's a really interesting experiment, I think, to learn more about.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting that, we can assume people don't have entitlements, but there's an assumption built into the system.
Yeah.
They don't have entitlement, but actually, if you give people time and space to regularize their situation, you actually support them to move on. So we have 1 minute left, and there's 2 questions, but they're broadly on the same thing, which is to delve into the European thing. And I know we don't want to do too much of that, but just to I think broadly, what are you finding are the particular challenges in expanding the model into other regions, into other systems flexible enough to take? Is the system flexible enough to take local nuances into account? So across the EU. So I know you're grappling with that at the moment. So maybe a quick one on that.
I think one of the main challenges of the European project is finding a balance between a comparability and a standardized method for the whole of Europe, and at the other hand, creating local ownership. From my point of view, I think the Belgian method can be used in the whole of Europe, but that's of course my point of view. That's quite stupid to say in that way, but it's like we all know that this kind of a top-down approach doesn't work. You really need to go into a process with the cities. You really need to understand their local situation, their local context. So, and it also means that there are some kind of local data collection. So taking all these into account, what we are doing now, it's a threat, of course, for comparability. So that's the paradox we are in now. And so what we have learned until now is that the service system is very different in different countries. And you can't make generalizations about that. For instance, in Porto, which is a huge city that's also taking part in the project, but the city consists of different municipalities. So you have the municipality of Porto and you have the city region of Porto. The municipality is around 300,000 inhabitants. The city region is 2 million. What are the local researchers are saying to us? In the municipality, they have a really good approach with case managers. They have a really good action plan, but it's not covering the whole city. So in Milan, Milan is also taking part in the project. You have a very, very difficult situation of undocumented migrants. It's a huge political issue. Just to give some examples, in Dublin, there is the very extensive pass system in which already a lot of information is available. So yeah, we are not going to say this is a bad system, of course. But so it means that all these different cities and regions have different traditions, and we need some time, I think, to come to a common methodology. And of course, the more you you're stressing ownership, it also leads to less comparable results at the European level. But my idea is always homelessness is, you can compare homelessness in Dublin with homelessness in Porto and with homelessness in Budapest. They are different. We all call it homelessness, but we really have to avoid the risk of assumptive research, thinking that when we compare the statistics between Dublin, Porto, and Budapest, that we're talking about the same realities. It's not the case. So we really have to take that local situation, really to understand from the inside the homelessness. So data collection is important at European level. We have to bring all these actors to and national states to a common approach, but at the same time we have to be aware that homelessness is very different in different cities. So comparability is a huge issue, and sleeping rough, like I said, in Budapest, or sleeping rough in Milan, or sleeping rough in Porto is something completely different. Just a very, very last example. I was in April with my children and my wife in Porto, and really try and walk around in the city. And if you walk around in the city, you see a lot of abandoned village houses. So you don't see people sleeping rough, but they are staying in abandoned village houses. Is this ethos 1? Is it ethos 5? Then the discussion starts. The same applies to, we have also Slovakia on board, Kosice. Kosice has a very large Roma settlement in the city. Yeah, what are you going to do with it? So these local elements are really important to take in account. And like I said, our Belgian method is also really meant to let us think about what do we mean by homelessness.
Yeah, I suppose the answer then in part to that is, taking in all those nuances, is that when we create a European model, we're actually creating a European understanding of homelessness in the same way as we create an Irish one. It's not a comparable between the different ones. It's how do we address homelessness from the European perspective, and that's why you have the count. So I think it's I think that's a really useful way of thinking about it, because it means it gets away from this thing of, oh, are we doing better in France or the UK or whatever. It's actually about understanding it in the European context and the differences of experiences.
Exactly.
That's quite powerful. Yeah.
But okay, that was a short answer to the question. Thank you.
Yes. Well, we have overrun by a couple of minutes, but I think those of you who've stayed with us, I want to thank you for doing that. I want to thank Koen again for taking time out of his annual leave to be with us, and to say, like, it's really interesting. I think this is a conversation we're going to need to keep having. And I think both at the local level and at the European level, it's a really powerful and important discussion if we want to get to the solutions of ending homelessness. And with that, I will just say thank you to you, Koen, and thank you to all of my colleagues for staying online.